The Kithran ascendancy had taken 40 worlds without losing a single soldier. They landed in an ancient English forest at dusk, expecting farmers. Then they started digging into a hill that had been claimed for 200 years. Something underneath had lived there longer than their empire, and at nightfall it came out. If you love stories where humanity refuses to lose, do me a favor right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with one friend who needs a good story tonight. And down in the comments, tell me this. If the sky opened above your town, what is the very first thing you would grab? I read every single one. Now let us move forward, into the trees, into the mud, and into the longest night the Forest of Dean has ever seen. The Forest of Dean sits in the west of England, wedged between the River Wye and the River Severn. It is not a park, it is not a garden. It is 27,000 acres of oak, beech, cold clay, and old coal, and the same families have worked it for longer than most nations have had flags. The ground there is not solid. That is the first thing anybody local will tell you, usually before they tell you their name. Under the trees, the hills are hollow. There are scowls, which are ancient open workings where people scraped iron out of the rock before the Romans arrived. There are pit levels, adits, water doors, and drifts, some mapped, many not. There are shafts that were filled in with rubble and hope sometime around 1930, and there are tunnels that nobody has walked down since before the last war. And in the middle of all that, on a slope the locals call Gorsley Bank, there is a badger set. Not a small one, a cathedral of a set. Roughly 200 meters of tunnel spread through the hillside on 3 levels, with more than 30 entrances. Some of them wide enough for a grown man to crawl into, if he had a poor sense of self-preservation. Generations of badgers had dug it, expanded it, and passed it down. The oldest chambers in that hill were dug before the village had electricity. The current owner of the set was a boar badger the whole parish called Wilf. Nobody knew how old Wilf was. Barry Wint said 14. Norman Sallies said 9, and that Barry could not count. What everybody agreed on was the rule, and the rule was simple, and the rule was absolute. You do not dig Wilf's hill, not because of superstition. Because if you dig into that hill, the hill comes down. Ted Boulay had been telling the council that for 30 years, in writing, in triplicate. The village at the bottom of the slope was called Ruddle Cross. It had a pub, a chapel that had become a tire garage, a post office that was really the front room of a bungalow, a T-van that only accepted cash, and a bus shelter. The bus shelter matters. Remember the bus shelter? Pauline Grigg had fought for that bus shelter for 6 years. 6 years of parish meetings, 6 years of forms, 6 years of a highways officer named Gareth telling her the sight lines were unsuitable. She had beaten Gareth. The shelter had been installed in April. It had a bench, a roof, and a small plaque with the date on it, and Pauline looked at it every morning the way other people look at their children. Gwen Pritchard ran the pub, which was called the Miners' Rest, and had been called that since 1860. She was 53, about 5'2", and had once removed 2 grown men from her premises using nothing but eye contact and a tea towel. Her son Alfie was 23, worked at the sawmill, and had the general energy of a Labrador that had learned to drive. Ted Boulay was 71 and a free miner. That is a real thing. In that part of the country, a man born inside a certain boundary who has worked a year and a day underground can claim a gale, which is a legal right to work his own mine. Ted had one. It was called the Perseverance, and his grandfather had opened it, and Ted still went down it twice a week to keep the water doors moving, because a mine that is not maintained does not stay a mine. It becomes a hole in the ground that is waiting for someone. Norman Sallies was a verderer, which is an official who has looked after that forest under laws older than the printing press. Dot Farrow ran the T-van. Sid Merrick had sheep, and in that forest sheep are not fenced. They wander onto roads, into gardens, and occasionally into the pub, and then there was the American. Commander Dale Whittaker, United States Navy, 39 years old, was on a 2-year exchange posting at a joint communications relay station 11 miles from Ruddle Cross. It was, by any honest measure, the least exciting job in the Alliance. He monitored a satellite uplink, he signed for equipment, and once a month he wrote a report that nobody read. On the evening of the 14th of October, Whittaker was driving a service vehicle down a forest lane, because a repeater mast had dropped out, and the fault log said the cause was, quote, animal interference. He suspected a squirrel. He had a torch, a toolkit, and a sandwich. He was 2 miles from the mast when the sky turned white. It was not lightning. Lightning does not hum. This hummed low and even, like a fridge the size of a county. Whitaker stopped the vehicle and got out into the cold and looked up through a gap in the beaches, and he watched 3 long gray shapes come down through the cloud in complete formation. Slow and silent, with running lights the color of old bone. His radio gave him nothing, not silence. Worse, it gave him a smooth, patient tone, the sound of something politely holding the channel shut. He got back in the vehicle and drove to the village, because it was the nearest place with people in it, and because he had been trained to gather civilians and secure a position. He arrived at 7:11 in the evening. He got out with his hands raised slightly, ready to explain, ready to calm, ready to organize an evacuation. The village was already outside, all of it. Standing in the road in coats and slippers looking up. "Evening," said Gwen Pritchard. "Ma'am," Whitaker said. "I need everyone indoors." "Why?" He pointed at the sky, where a vessel 400 meters long was descending over the tree line. "Oh, we've seen it," said Barry Wint. His terrier Nipper was straining at the lead and barking at the ship with genuine hatred. "Been watching it for 20 minutes. Sir, that is not a civilian aircraft." "No," Barry agreed. "It's not. Then why is nobody moving?" Pauline Grigg looked at him with the calm of a woman who had beaten a highways officer named Gareth. "Where would we go, love?" The lead vessel settled onto the common at the edge of the village. Landing struts came down through the mist and pressed into the wet ground. Steam rolled off the hull. A ramp lowered, and the strut on the port side, 2 meters of alloy weighing several tons, came down directly onto the bus shelter and folded it flat. The plaque cracked in half. The sound that came out of Pauline Grigg was not a scream. It was quieter than that and much worse. Whitaker turned to her. "Ma'am, please stay calm." Pauline was already reaching into her handbag for a pen. Overseer Salkar of the Kithran Ascendancy walked down the ramp at 7:19 in the evening, with 30 soldiers behind him, and absolutely no idea what he had just done. Salkar was a tall, narrow figure in gray articulated armor, with 4 fingers on each hand, and a face that had been described in his own service record as unusually severe. He had subdued populations on 40 worlds. His method was simple and it had never failed. Land in a low-value region, establish control, extract the resource, move on. The survey had been very clear. This region was rural, thinly populated, and rich in a magnetic ore signature buried under a wooded hill 300 meters to the northeast. "Analyst," Salkar said. "Confirm the deposit." Analyst Vec checked his readings. "Confirmed, Overseer, dense metallic signature layered beginning at 40 meters. The hill is unusual. There are voids throughout it. Natural caves, some, others are too regular, they appear engineered. By whom?" Vec hesitated. "Unclear. The engineering is very old." Salkar raised his voice and let the translator carry it across the common. "People of this settlement, you are now under the authority of the Kithran Ascendancy. Return to your dwellings. Do not approach the excavation. Compliance will be rewarded. Resistance will not be tolerated." Nobody returned to their dwelling. Instead, a small woman in a green coat walked directly up to him, past 2 soldiers who were too surprised to stop her, and held out a piece of paper. "You'll want to read that," said Pauline Grigg. Salkar looked at it. "What is this?" "That is a notice of damage to parish property. Your machine has destroyed a bus shelter. That shelter was funded by the parish precept and installed on the 9th of April. You will need to provide insurance details and a contact address for correspondence." Salkar stared at her. "I am an invading force. I don't care what you drive, love, you've still got to give me your details." Whitaker stepped forward fast, put himself between them, and did the thing he had been trained to do, which was to speak clearly and identify himself. "Overseer, I am Commander Dale Whitaker, United States Navy. I am the senior military officer present. These are unarmed civilians. Any grievance you have is with me." It was, objectively, a brave thing to say. Salkar looked at him with mild interest, the way a man looks at a road sign. "You are a soldier." "I am." "Good. You will be useful. You will instruct them to disperse." Whitaker turned around to instruct them to disperse. They had already dispersed into the pub. The miners' rest was full, warm, and loud, because Tuesday was quiz night and the quiz did not stop for anything. It had not stopped for the flood in 2012. It had not stopped when the roof caught fire. Gwen was behind the bar with a laminated question sheet and a pen behind her ear. "Round 2, she announced. "Geography." Whitaker came through the door with the expression of a man watching a bridge collapse in slow motion. "Everybody needs to listen to me right now." "Question 1, said Gwen. "What is the longest river in the United Kingdom? There is an armed extraterrestrial force on your common." "That's not the answer, love." "Sit down, you can join Ted's team, they're one short." Ted Bulai shifted along the bench and patted the wood next to him. Whitaker sat down. He did not know why he sat down. Something about the room made standing feel rude. The door opened again and 6 Kithran soldiers came in with weapons raised. The quiz did not stop. "Question 2, said Gwen without looking up. "Which county contains the Forest of Dean?" The squad leader keyed his translator. "This building is now under ascendancy control. All occupants will comply." "Gloucestershire," said Barry Wint. "That's a gift, that one. You will comply." "We heard you," said Gwen. "You're standing in front of the fire." The squad leader had conquered a mining colony in the Rel system. He had never in his life been asked to move, because he was blocking a fireplace. His processing stalled entirely, and while it did, Alfie Pritchard leaned over and quietly took a photograph of him with a phone, and the flash went off. Every weapon in the room came up. And Gwen Pritchard put down the quiz sheet. She came around the bar. She was 5'2". She walked straight through 6 armed soldiers of a 40-world empire, and she stopped in front of the squad leader, and she pointed at his boots. "Look at my floor." The squad leader looked at the floor. It was covered in wet gray mud from the common. "I mopped that at 5. I am here to secure this structure. You're here dragging half the field in with you. There's a mat. It's by the door. It's there for a reason." And the squad leader of the Kithran Ascendancy, holder of 2 commendations, took 1 step backwards onto the mat. He did not decide to do it. His body did it. Somewhere in his training there was a gap where this situation should have been, and in that gap the woman won. Behind him, Norman Sally stood up. Norman was 78 and had been a verderer for 40 years, which meant he enforced forest law that predated the concept of a nation-state. "You're going up Gorsley Bank," Norman said. "It was not a question. I saw your survey drone. That is not your concern. It is entirely my concern. That's a protected set." Norman tapped the table. "Protection of Badgers Act, 1992. You cannot damage a set. You cannot obstruct an entrance. You cannot disturb an animal while it's occupying one. Not without a license." Vec, listening on the open channel from outside, spoke into Salkar's ear. "Overseer. They are claiming legal protection for a burrowing mammal. They are stalling. I do not believe they are, Overseer." "The Elder is quoting a statute number." Salkar's voice came through the squad leader's translator, cold and flat. "Begin the excavation." Ted Bulai set down his glass. He was 71 years old. He had been underground since he was 16. He knew that hill better than he knew his own kitchen, and he knew what was inside it. Because his grandfather had cut 2 levels of the Perseverance through the eastern flank of it in 1922 and had stopped, and had written in the Gale book, in pencil, the words, "Ground is not sound, do not proceed." Ted stood up slowly. "Son," he said to Whitaker, "how long have we got?" "Before what?" "Before they put a drill in that bank." Whitaker looked out of the window at the lights moving up through the trees. "An hour," he said. Ted picked up his coat. "Then we've got an hour to work out how to get everybody in this village to higher ground before that hill eats them." The Kithran Ascendancy had a phrase for a world like this: low friction. It meant a place where the population would fold quickly, the extraction would run clean, and the fleet would be gone within a rotation. By 9 o'clock that evening, analyst Vec had privately stopped using the phrase. The trouble began with the road. The excavation convoy consisted of 11 vehicles, including a heavy drilling rig on tracks. To reach Gorsley Bank, they had to travel 1.6 miles up a single-lane forest road with high banks on both sides. Half a mile in, they met the sheep. There were about 40 of them, and they belonged to Sid Merrick, and they did not belong on the road in any legal sense. But in that forest, sheep have grazing rights that are older than the road itself. They were standing in the middle of it, chewing in the drizzle. The lead vehicle sounded a warning tone. The sheep did not move. The lead vehicle emitted a low-frequency dispersal pulse designed to clear crowds. The sheep did not move. One of them sat down. "Subwarden," the driver reported, "we are obstructed by domestic quadrupeds." Subwarden Trell arrived on foot, looked at the sheep, and ordered them removed. Two soldiers dismounted and attempted to push a ewe. Anybody who has ever tried to push a wet sheep uphill will already know how this went. A ewe weighs about 70 kilos and has a center of gravity that appears to be located somewhere in the past. The soldier pushed. The ewe leaned. The soldier's boots slid in the clay. The ewe walked forward 2 steps, and the soldier went down flat on his back in a puddle that had been forming since Thursday. The convoy was delayed 19 minutes. Sid Merrick watched the whole thing from a gate, drinking tea from a flask. "That's Doris," he told nobody. "She's done that to a fire engine." At 9:40, the convoy reached the base of Gorsley Bank and began to set up. And this is where the forest itself joined in, because the Forest of Dean has wild boar. That is not a joke, and it is not folklore. There is a genuine, established population of wild boar living in those woods. They are large, they are fast, they are extremely protective of their young, and they are active at night. Local people are advised, seriously and in writing, to keep away from them. The Kithrin did not have that advice. A 4-man perimeter team moved into the bracken at 10 past 10 and walked directly into a sounder of 11 boar, including piglets. What followed was recorded on the team's helmet feed and was later reviewed by Ascendancy Command in absolute silence. The audio consists of a scanner beep, one soldier saying "minor fauna," and then 40 seconds of noise that Vec was unable to categorize. A sow weighing over 100 kilos hit the first soldier at the knees at full speed. He went into a holly bush. The second soldier discharged his weapon into a tree. The third ran and encountered a second boar coming the other way, which is the specific thing you are told never to do. The fourth climbed a beach and stayed there until 2:15 in the morning, at which point he was helped down by Barry Wint, who was out looking for Nipper and who said, and this is a direct quote from the recording, "You want to come down, mate, that's a beach, they snap." Meanwhile, up on the eastern flank of the hill, Ted Bilai was doing something far more useful than fighting. He was opening the Perseverance. Whitaker went with him because Whitaker had made a decision in the pub car park that he could not entirely justify to himself. His orders, had he been able to receive any, would have been to withdraw and report. But there were 91 people in Ruddle Cross. The comms were jammed, and the only man alive who knew what was inside that hill was 71 and had a bad hip. So Commander Dale Whitaker of the United States Navy found himself holding a torch while a pensioner unlocked a rusted iron gate set into a hillside. "How far in does it go?" Whitaker asked. "Level 1 runs 300 yards, Level 2 runs under the bank." Ted swung the gate open. Cold air came out of the hill, and it smelled of iron and wet stone. "My grandfather stopped it too." "Wrote it down, ground is not sound." "Why not? Because that's where the workings meet the set." Whitaker stopped. "The Badger set, 200 meters of tunnel, 3 levels, 30-odd entrances, right through the same ground as the old iron workings and the scowls." Ted turned and looked at him. "That hill isn't a hill, son, it's a crust. There's more air in it than rock. It's held up because nobody's ever put weight on the crown of it and nobody's ever put pressure into it." Whitaker looked back down the slope, at the lights of the drilling rig. At the Kithrin engineers assembling a compression bore that was designed to blast through solid granite. "They're about to do both," he said. "They are. How long before it goes?" Ted did not answer straight away. He was looking at something in the dark at the edge of the torchlight, 40 feet away, where a wide, flattened entrance opened under a root. There was a shape sitting in it. Low, broad, and absolutely still, with a white stripe running down a black face. "Ted," Whitaker said quietly, "is that? That's Wilf." The Badger watched them for 4 long seconds. Then it turned and went back down into the dark, unhurried, the way something moves when it is not leaving, only deciding. Down at the bottom of the slope, the compression bore fired up. The bore went in at 11:51 that night. It was an impressive piece of engineering. It did not cut rocks so much as persuade it, driving a shaped pressure wave ahead of the head and pushing the shattered material back through a return line. On solid granite, it advanced at 11 meters a minute. On the flank of Gorsley Bank, it advanced at 40. Analyst Vec noticed the number and did not like it. Overseer. The bore is exceeding expected penetration by a factor of 3. Then we are ahead of schedule. No, Overseer, we are ahead of resistance. There is nothing there for it to cut. We are pushing pressurized material into a network of voids. Salkar studied the survey overlay. The voids will collapse and consolidate. That is one possibility. State the other. Vec chose his words with care because he had a family. The other is that the voids are connected, and we are pressurizing all of them at once. At the same moment, 400 meters up the eastern flank. Alfie Pritchard was doing something extremely stupid for a reason that made complete sense to him. Ted had sent 3 of the younger lads to open the old water doors on level 2. Water doors are exactly what they sound like. Heavy timber and iron barriers that hold back groundwater in a worked mine. When they are shut, water backs up. When they are opened in the right order, the water drains along a controlled route and out through the adit. Ted's plan was simple, and it was the plan of a man who had spent 55 years learning where water wants to go. Drain the eastern workings. Let the ground on that side settle and lock. Put every soft void on the western side, directly under the Keithran excavation. Alfie had opened the first 2 doors. He was at the third when the pressure wave from the bore came through the strata like a fist through a wall. The roof came down 20 feet behind him. Whitaker heard it from the adit mouth. It was not a bang. It was a long, deep, granular roar that went on for 11 seconds, and then a punch of dust and cold air that came out of the hillside hard enough to take his cap off. Gwen Pritchard was standing at the gate. She did not scream. She said one word, which was her son's name, and she started walking into the hill, and Whitaker caught her at the second step and held her, and she fought him, and he did not let go. Ma'am, ma'am. Look at me, I need you to look at me. He's in there. I know, listen to me. Whitaker turned her by the shoulders. I have done mine rescue training, do you understand? I know how to do this. But I cannot do it while I am holding you. Gwen stopped fighting. Then go and get him, she said. What followed was the part of that night that nobody in Ruddle Cross ever tells as a joke. Whitaker went in with Ted, Norman Sally's on the line at the mouth, and Bari went carrying the rope because Bari, it turned out, had spent 11 years on a cave rescue team and had never once mentioned it. They found the fall at 240 feet. They found Alfie behind it, alive, in a pocket of air about the size of a garden shed, with a broken forearm and a great deal to say about it. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes to bring him out. They did it by hand, 1 stone at a time in the dark, with the hill groaning around them and dust coming down the shaft every time the Keithran bore surged. And while they worked, Ted Bulai did the arithmetic. They're pumping into the west side, he said. They've cut the drainage I opened. All that water's going one way now, and it's going under their pad. How much water? 50-odd years of it. Whitaker wiped his face. Ted. If that crown goes while their heavy units are on it, then it goes. That's a lot of people down there. Then we tell them, said Ted, once properly. And after that, it's on them. So at 3 in the morning, Commander Dale Whitaker of the United States Navy walked down Gorsley Bank alone with his hands empty and his jacket torn. And he stood in the floodlights in front of Overseer Salkar, and he gave the warning. Overseer, you are drilling into a void network. There are 200 meters of animal tunnel and roughly a mile of unmapped 19th century mine working inside that hill, on 3 levels, all interconnected. You are pressurizing them. You are also displacing groundwater into the ground beneath your own equipment pad. If you put your heavy units on the crown of that bank, it will fail. Not partially. Completely, Salkar looked at him for a long moment. You are asking me to stop. I am telling you the ground will not hold. Analyst, said Salkar. Is the deposit still detected? Yes, Overseer. Then advance the heavy units to the crown. Whitaker did not raise his voice. He simply nodded once. For the record, he said, I told you. He walked back up the hill. At 4:12 in the morning, the Keithran walker moved onto the crown of Gorsley Bank. It weighed 90 tons. It took 4 steps. And on the 4th step, 40 feet below it in the dark, in a chamber his family had dug before the village had electricity. Something that had been listening to all of it for 6 hours decided that it had heard enough. The badger came out. He came out of a bolt hole under a root at the north edge of the excavation trench, which is what badgers do when their set is disturbed. Sets have escape routes. That is the whole point of a set. Wilf did not charge down a hill in a rage. He surfaced behind the Kithran line, at the far end of the workings, exactly the way his species has been surfacing behind things for 250,000 years. He was about 1 meter long and weighed roughly 15 kilos. Compared to a 90-ton walker, he was nothing. Except that a European badger has forelimbs built entirely for shifting earth, a skull with a jaw that locks into the bone so it cannot be pulled loose, and no meaningful understanding of surrender. And this one had just had the roof of his home cracked open. The first Kithran engineer never saw him. He was kneeling at a cable junction with his back to the bank when 15 kilos of extremely annoyed mustelid arrived at knee height. The bite went through the seal at the top of his boot, and the badger did not let go because they do not, and the engineer went over backwards into the trench screaming into an open channel. Contact, contact, low contact, it is under me. Sub-Warden Trell arrived at a run with 6 soldiers. What they found was a dark shape moving fast along the trench floor in the dust, and a colleague on his back. And no clear line of fire in any direction that did not include their own people or their own drilling rig. They fired anyway. 3 shots went into the trench wall. And the trench wall, which was 140 years of loose iron working and badger tunnel held together by tree roots and habit, did what it had been threatening to do all night. It slumped. It took the cable run with it. It took the return line off the bore, and with the return line gone, the compression head had nowhere to push the shattered material except sideways, into every void it could find. Analyst Vec, watching the pressure figures climb, said the only thing left to say, "Overseer. Get off the hill." On the crown, the walker pilot felt the ground move under his left foot pad and corrected. Correcting is the worst possible thing to do on a crust. He shifted 90 tons onto the right leg, and the right leg went in up to the knee joint, and the sound that came up out of Gorsley Bank was not a collapse. It was a swallow. Ted Bulai, standing at the adit mouth with Whitaker and half of Ruddle Cross behind him on the safe ground, took his cap off. "There she goes," he said. The crown of Gorsley Bank dropped 11 meters in under 30 seconds. 55 years of held groundwater found the new opening and came out of the eastern adit in a brown wall, exactly where Ted had known it would, and swept the entire Kithran equipment, pad 400 meters down the valley, and into a stand of alders. The drilling rig went end over end. 2 transport vehicles were carried through a hedge and deposited in a field belonging to Sid Merrick, where they were investigated by Doris. The walker went down into the hill. It did not explode. It simply sank, tilted, and settled, until only the upper body and one arm were showing above the mud, in the pose of a man who has fallen asleep in a bath. And the Kithran Ascendancy, an empire of 40 worlds, spent the rest of that night climbing out of a hole in Gloucestershire. They were pulled out mostly by the village. That is the part Salkar could never explain in his report. Norman Sally's brought ropes. Barry Wint brought his rescue kit. Gwen opened the pub at 5:30 in the morning and put every heater on and made 90 cups of tea. And when 4 Kithran soldiers were carried in shaking and gray with cold, she put blankets on them and told them to sit down and drink it while it was hot. One of them, a young engineer with a badly torn boot, could not stop staring at the fire. "Why," he asked through a translator that kept cutting out, "are you assisting us?" Dot Farrow, who was pouring, did not look up. "Because you're wet, love." Overseer Salkar was brought in at 6:20. He had lost his helmet, his left gauntlet, and any coherent sense of how the last 11 hours had happened. He was set down on a bench near the door, and he sat there, and nobody said anything to him at all, which was worse than anything anyone could have said. Pauline Grigg came over and put a piece of paper on the table in front of him. "Bus shelter," she said. "Insurance details. When you've got a minute." And through the open door in the first gray light, on the broken edge of what used to be Gorsley Bank, a low black and white shape moved along the top of the spoil. Sniffed at the sunken arm of a 90-ton war machine, and began, without any apparent urgency, to dig a new entrance. The Kithrin fleet left at 4 in the afternoon on the 15th of October, 21 hours after it arrived. It left behind one heavy walker, which is still there, because the recovery assessment concluded that any attempt to lift it would collapse the remaining ground. It left 2 transport vehicles in Sid Merrick's field. It left a drilling rig and a stand of alders. And it left 41 soldiers who required medical attention, 38 of them for hypothermia, exhaustion, or injuries sustained while climbing out of mud, and 3 of them for wounds inflicted by a protected native mammal in defense of its habitat. Overseer Salkar delivered his report to the Ascendancy Assembly 9 days later. He stood in front of 9 counselors, and he did not attempt to explain the tactical situation, because he had concluded that it could not be explained. Instead, he presented the survey data, the pressure telemetry, and the helmet feeds, and he let them watch it. They watched a squad leader step onto a doormat. They watched a soldier attempt to move a sheep and lose. They watched 4 soldiers meet 11 wild boar in the dark. They watched a 78-year-old man cite a statute number at an invading army. And they watched, in the pressure logs, that the man had been correct about the ground the entire time. They watched a 90-ton walker sink into a hill. And they watched 30 seconds of grainy low light recording in which a creature the size of a briefcase came out of the earth behind the entire operation and took it apart from the bottom up. The first counselor spoke first. "What is that animal?" "It is called a badger," said Salkar. "Is it a weapon of theirs?" "No, that is the point, counselor. They do not own it, they protect it. They have a written law forbidding interference with its home." He paused. "We were warned about that law twice before we began. We were warned about the ground 3 times. The last warning was given to me personally by their commanding officer, who walked down to me alone and unarmed to give it. And you disregarded it." "I did." The assembly deliberated for 2 hours. The entry they added to the Ascendancy Hazard Register is now shown to every survey crew before deployment, and it reads as follows. Designation Earth. Region Britain, Western River Valleys. Do not excavate. Ground stability cannot be assessed from orbit. Subsurface is extensively hollowed by both industrial and biological activity, frequently unmapped. Local population will warn you. Their warnings are accurate. Their compliance is not obtainable and should not be attempted. Local fauna is protected by statute and is aware of this. Note especially the burrowing species. It will not be visible. It will not be where you are looking. It will come out behind you. Back in Ruddle Cross, things settled by the weekend, as things do. Ted Bulai reopened the Perseverance on the Monday and found level 1 dry for the first time since 1984. Which he described as the only good thing aliens have ever done. He also, finally, received a letter from the county council acknowledging receipt of his 30 years of correspondence regarding the instability of Gorsley Bank. Ted framed it. It hangs in the pub next to the dartboard. Alfie Pritchard's arm healed in 7 weeks. He tells the story of the collapse to anybody who will listen, and it gets slightly longer every year, and Gwen lets him. Because for 2 hours and 40 minutes on the 14th of October, she did not know if she still had a son. Barry Wint was given a citation by the Cave Rescue Association and did not attend the ceremony because Nipper had a vet appointment. Pauline Grigg never did receive insurance details. She did, however, receive a bus shelter. The parish council voted to build a new one using salvaged hull plating from the Kithrin transport in Sid Merrick's field, and it is now, without question, the most structurally sound bus shelter in England. It has a bench, a roof, and a small plaque with 2 dates on it, the date it was installed and the date it was flattened. Norman Sally submitted a formal report on damage to the set at Gorsley Bank. Natural England surveyed it in the spring and confirmed that the set was still active, that it had extended into the collapse zone, and that the resident boar badger appeared to be in excellent condition. Commander Dale Whittaker was recalled and debriefed for 6 days. He was asked repeatedly to explain how a settlement of 91 civilians with no weapons and no evacuation plan had defeated an armed incursion by a 40-world power. His final written answer is 1 paragraph long, and it is the only part of that report that has ever been read aloud at the Academy. They did not defeat anybody. They simply refused to accept that the situation was unusual. The enemy arrived expecting fear and instead received a parking complaint, a quiz question, an instruction to wipe their boots, and 3 separate accurate technical warnings that they chose to ignore. The ground did the rest. I would add only this. When they were done, those civilians went out in the dark and pulled 41 of the enemy out of the mud and gave them tea. I have thought about that every day since. I do not think we won because we were stronger. I think we won because they never once bothered to ask us anything. Whitaker requested an extension to his exchange posting. It was granted. He is still there. He does the quiz on a Tuesday. Ted's team is 1 short. If you enjoyed this one, drop a comment and tell me your favorite moment, whether it was the doormat, the sheep, or the moment the ground finally went. And please share this video with one person who needs to hear that ordinary people are not as ordinary as they look. And as for Wilf is still there. He is older now and grayer around the muzzle, and he has never in his life understood that anything happened. On summer evenings, if you sit very still at the bottom of Gorsley Bank, you can sometimes watch him come out at dusk, pause on the spoil beside the sunken arm of a 90-ton war machine, scratch himself against it, and wander off into the trees to find worms. 40 worlds fell to the Kithrin ascendancy. The 40 first had a badger, and the badger was not moving.